In February 1945, Canadian forces launched Operation Blockbuster against Germany's last defensive line west of the Rhine. It was a decisive moment in the final months of the Second World War, a battle that would test courage, resilience, and determination in ways few could imagine. The Rhineland campaign was no ordinary confrontation, it was the desperate stand of a collapsing regime, and the relentless push of Allied armies determined to bring the war in Europe to its end. The setting was the Hochwald Gap, a narrow strip of land in northwestern Germany. On the surface, it may have seemed like just another battlefield, but its strategic value was enormous. The gap was the last natural defensive barrier before the Rhine River, the gateway into the German heartland. If the Allies could break through, the path to Berlin would be open. If they failed, the war could drag on, costing countless more lives. For the soldiers of Canada's 2nd and 4th Armoured Divisions, this was not just another mission. It was a crucible, a test of survival where every step forward was paid for in blood. The battle unfolded in a storm of mud, fire, and steel. German defenders, though weakened, fought with the ferocity of men who knew they were protecting their homeland. Tanks and infantry clashed in brutal close-range combat. Artillery thundered without pause, and the frozen fields of the Rhineland turned into a graveyard of machines and men. For the Canadians, it became one of the fiercest and most costly battles of the entire war. Yet, within that hardship, stories of extraordinary bravery emerged, stories that history often overlooks. This is not just a tale of strategy and tactics. It is a human story of soldiers who pressed forward through fear, of comrades who sacrificed everything, and of a nation whose role in the victory of 1945 deserves to be remembered. Too often, the contributions of Canadian forces in the final push into Germany are overshadowed by larger narratives. But here, in the Hochwald Gap, they proved their strength, their resilience, and their indispensable role in bringing an end to Nazi tyranny. As we explore the dramatic events of Operation Blockbuster, we will uncover what made this battle both devastating and decisive. We will look at the strategies, the challenges, and the human cost. Most importantly, we will bring forward the voices and experiences of those who fought there, so that their sacrifices are never forgotten. If you are passionate about uncovering the hidden chapters of World War II, stories that go beyond the well-known headlines, then you are in the right place. Our channel is dedicated to bringing history to life, stories of courage, struggle, and triumph that shaped the world we live in today. Before we dive deeper into this remarkable chapter, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you won't miss any of our upcoming videos. By doing, you help us continue to share powerful stories of the past with audiences around the world. Together, we can keep history alive, one story at a time. The Rhineland, once peaceful farmland, became the stage for one of the most brutal confrontations of the Second World War. A clash that transformed fields and villages into landscapes of devastation where history was rewritten in fire and sacrifice. For centuries, the Rhineland had been known as a region of fertile soil and industrious people, a place where generations worked the land and built quiet communities that seemed far removed from the storm of global conflict. Yet by early 1945, that tranquil image had been shattered as Allied forces pressed forward toward the Rhine, determined to break through Germany's last defensive line before reaching the heart of the Reich. For Canadian soldiers, the responsibility of piercing this formidable barrier fell heavily on their shoulders, and with Operation Blockbuster, they were thrust into a crucible that demanded courage, endurance, and unity at levels few could have imagined. The German defenses in the Rhineland were no simple obstacle. They were layered with minefields, camouflaged artillery, and villages converted into strongpoints that bristled with machine guns and fortified positions. Every road, every hedgerow, and every farmhouse could conceal danger, and the Canadian troops advancing into this terrain understood that the mission ahead would not only test their training but would also strip away any illusions about the nature of modern warfare. The quiet farms and winding country lanes, once symbols of rural calm, had been turned into killing grounds where even a few yards gained demanded immense sacrifice. For the Canadians, the advance was not only about breaking through physical barriers, but about maintaining resolve in the face of relentless resistance. What made the Rhineland battles especially grueling was the landscape itself. In February and March, heavy rains turned the fields into seas of mud, bogging down tanks and supply vehicles and forcing infantry to wade through terrain that clung to every step. Villages reduced to rubble provided little cover yet remained fiercely defended by German troops determined to hold their ground. For every building cleared and every field secured, there was the risk of a counterattack, and the fighting seemed to grind forward inch by inch. Soldiers who had once thought of war in terms of sweeping maneuvers now experienced it as an exhausting struggle for survival against both enemy fire and the unforgiving environment. The Rhineland, once a breadbasket of Germany, had been transformed into a battlefield where life and death hung on the smallest of decisions. The Canadians knew they were part of something larger than themselves. Beyond the mud, the blood, and the destruction lay the Rhine River, a symbolic and strategic barrier that represented Germany's last line of defense before the Allied armies could thrust into its industrial heartlands. Crossing that river meant not only advancing deeper into enemy territory, but also bringing the war closer to its end. For many soldiers, this knowledge fueled their determination, but it also added weight to every loss they suffered along the way. The Rhineland was more than just another campaign. It was the key that would unlock the road to victory, and both sides understood its significance all too well. In the midst of this chaos, individual stories of bravery and endurance emerged, offering glimpses of humanity in an otherwise relentless battle. Soldiers helped one another through the mud, shared rations under shellfire, and carried the wounded back to safety even when danger was only steps away. Officers tried to maintain morale, reminding their men of the importance of their mission, while chaplains and medics worked tirelessly to comfort and care for those caught in the worst of the fighting. For many Canadians, it was the bonds formed in these moments that kept them moving forward, even when exhaustion and fear threatened to overwhelm them. The Rhineland demanded everything from them, but it also revealed a resilience that would forever define their legacy. Yet the cost was immense. Entire villages were destroyed, landscapes scarred beyond recognition, and countless lives cut short. The Rhineland bore the weight of destruction that left deep scars, both physical and emotional. For the civilians who had once called it home, the war had turned familiar streets and fields into a nightmare of rubble and ruin. For the soldiers who fought there, it became a memory etched into their hearts, a reminder of how high the price of freedom could be. The peaceful farmland had been lost to the firestorm of modern war, and though victory would come, it would be paid for in suffering and sacrifice on an unimaginable scale. The story of the Rhineland is not just about strategies, maps, or dates. It is about the transformation of an ordinary landscape into a symbol of endurance, struggle, and the human cost of war. It is about how fields once meant for harvest became battlegrounds where destinies were decided. It is about soldiers who found themselves tested in ways they could never have foreseen, and about a campaign that helped shape the outcome of the entire conflict. The Rhineland, once peaceful, became a place where history itself was forged, and the echoes of those battles still resonate today as a reminder of both the resilience of the human spirit and the devastating impact of war. By February 1945, the scale of the Allied effort in the Rhineland was staggering. a massive orchestration of men, machines, and firepower that spoke to the determination of the forces poised to end the war in Europe. Over 90,000 soldiers were mobilized, a mixture of seasoned veterans hardened by years of combat and younger recruits whose training and courage would be tested under fire for the first time. Behind them, a thunderous arsenal of 1,300 artillery pieces awaited, poised to rain devastation on any German position that stood in the path of their advance. And at the forefront of this immense force rolled more than 1,000 Sherman tanks, their steel hulls reflecting the bleak winter light as they rumbled forward across frozen fields and through mud-choked villages, each engine a heartbeat in a machine larger than any one soldier could command. The Allies relied not on the perfection of each individual piece of equipment, but on the overwhelming weight of numbers, believing that quantity, coordination, and relentless pressure could overcome even the most determined resistance. The Sherman tanks themselves were remarkable in their own way, though they were not without limitations. They were nimble and reliable, capable of sustaining long hours of movement across terrain that would immobilize heavier vehicles. Yet their armor and firepower were modest compared to the German Panthers and Tigers that lay in wait among the forests and ridges of the Rhineland. This mismatch required strategy, innovation, and nerves of steel from their crews. A single miscalculation could mean destruction, and every engagement with German armor demanded precise coordination. Allied commanders understood that these tanks, though numerous, were most effective when working in concert with infantry, artillery, and air support, creating a layered approach that combined mobility, firepower, and protection in a way that could slowly, but steadily, wear down the defenders. The sheer logistics of moving such a force were a story unto themselves. Roads became choked with vehicles, mud turned tracks into a sink for tanks and supply trucks, and the coordination of artillery barrages required exact timing and flawless communication. In the frozen fields of the Rhineland, every movement was slowed, every advance contested, and yet the Allies pushed forward, knowing that hesitation would only embolden the defenders. Supply lines had to be maintained across hundreds of kilometers, ensuring that ammunition, fuel, and medical supplies reached those who needed them most. And yet the unpredictability of winter weather added an ever-present element of danger. The soldiers, aware of the limitations of their equipment and the strength of the enemy, pressed on with a mixture of courage and necessity, understanding that success depended on the cohesion and resilience of the entire force rather than any single unit. As the Canadian forces moved into the Hochwald Gap, the coordination between tanks and infantry became crucial. Infantry advanced alongside armored columns, clearing minefields, engaging enemy positions, and scouting the terrain for ambushes, while tanks provided cover and suppressed German strongpoints with sustained fire. Artillery opened the battlefield with devastating barrages, shaking the ground and disorienting defenders, yet it also required careful calculation to avoid friendly fire. Every soldier, every gunner, every commander was acutely aware that the difference between a successful advance and catastrophic losses often rested on the smallest details: the angle of a shell, the timing of a maneuver, or the ability to adapt when plans inevitably collided with the harsh realities of war. This interplay of strategy and improvisation, of planning and responsiveness, defined the rhythm of the battle and highlighted the remarkable organization required to bring such a massive force to bear against an entrenched enemy. Despite the overwhelming numbers, the Allies never underestimated their adversaries. German forces, though outnumbered and outgunned, were tenacious defenders who knew the terrain intimately and were willing to fight with a desperation born of protecting their homeland. Every Sherman tank that advanced faced not only enemy fire but hidden obstacles, ambushes, and the natural challenges of winter in the Rhineland, Crews had to maneuver through mud-choked roads, past destroyed villages, and across minefields, all while maintaining focus on the objective ahead. The combination of mechanical reliability, disciplined training, and sheer persistence allowed the Allied forces to gradually push the line forward. But the cost was visible in every scarred field and every burned-out vehicle that marked their path. The story of these 90,000 troops, supported by artillery and tanks, is ultimately a story of scale-meeting strategy. It was not the perfection of individual machines or even the skill of isolated soldiers that defined success, but the orchestration of thousands of men and hundreds of vehicles in a coordinated effort that could absorb losses and maintain momentum. It was this calculated, relentless pressure, the ability to combine mobility, firepower, and human determination, that allowed the Allies to penetrate the defenses of the Rhineland, overcome the stubborn resistance of German forces, and set the stage for the final advance into Germany. The sheer weight of numbers, when combined with strategy, courage, and resilience, transformed what might have been a simple confrontation into an epic campaign, a testament to both the complexity and the human dimension of warfare. Through the chaos and fire, the Canadians and their allies demonstrated that even when individual equipment may be outclassed, the collective effort, disciplined coordination, and unwavering resolve could achieve what no single unit could accomplish alone, turning the Rhineland from a line of defense into a gateway to victory. Despite being heavily outnumbered and facing an enemy whose sheer scale of men and machinery seemed insurmountable, the German defenders in the Rhineland displayed a level of determination and tactical skill that would make the Hochwald Gap one of the most fiercely contested battlefields of the Second World War. The German forces, aware that this was the last defensive barrier before the Rhine and ultimately the heart of their country, marshaled every available resource to hold their positions. Their armored divisions were composed primarily of the fearsome Panther and Tiger tanks, machines designed for lethality and psychological impact. Each Panther, with its sloped frontal armor and high-velocity 75mm gun, represented a combination of engineering precision and battlefield adaptability, capable of engaging enemy armor at distances that most Allied tanks could not counter effectively without careful maneuvering and support. The Tigers, heavier and slower but devastating in firepower, instilled caution and fear in even the most experienced Canadian crews. Their 88mm guns capable of obliterating a Sherman tank from a distance where retaliation seemed impossible. In addition to the tanks, the Germans employed around 100 anti-tank guns, hidden strategically in the forests, behind ridges, and in camouflaged emplacements along the roads and fields. These weapons, though fewer in number compared to the overwhelming artillery and armored forces of the Allies, were placed with precision and executed with deadly effect. The anti-tank crews understood the importance of timing, positioning, and coordination, often laying in wait to ambush advancing Shermans and Fireflies. The landscape, familiar to the defenders, became a force multiplier, allowing a small number of German units to hold up entire Allied columns through the effective use of terrain, combined fire, and the psychological impact of sudden, devastating strikes. Every tree line, every ruined farmhouse, every rise in the ground could conceal a threat, and the Canadians quickly learned that progress through the Rhineland would come only through relentless caution and tactical ingenuity. What truly distinguished the German defenders, however, was not only their machinery or strategic placement, but the human determination that underpinned their defense. Many soldiers had endured years of hardship and retreat across Europe, and now they found themselves defending their homeland, a motivation that imbued them with extraordinary resolve. For them, the fight was deeply personal. It was not about abstract ideology or loyalty to a regime, but about protecting family, villages, and a sense of home. This tenacity manifested in every engagement, in the stubborn holding of positions against overwhelming odds, and in the willingness to continue fighting even when the likelihood of survival was slim. The Canadian soldiers noted repeatedly the intensity of resistance they faced, often confronting opponents who seemed ready to sacrifice everything to delay or halt the advance, turning even small engagements into tests of endurance and nerve. The German defensive strategy in the Hochwald Gap combined these elements of engineering, weaponry, and human resolve into a cohesive system of resistance that made every inch of the advance costly. Mines, booby traps, and pre-registered artillery fire compounded the threat from tanks and infantry, creating a multi-layered defense that slowed the Allied progress to a painstaking crawl. In some cases, a single German Panther, positioned in a well-chosen location, could dominate a wide area of the battlefield, forcing Canadian units to adjust their approach. Coordinate artillery, or risk heavy losses. The psychological impact of knowing that an 88mm shell could arrive at any moment, capable of destroying a tank or killing a crew in an instant, added to the tension and demanded constant vigilance. For the Allies, every maneuver became a balance between aggression and caution, each decision weighted with potential consequences for men and machines alike. This combination of high-quality armor, strategic deployment of anti-tank weapons, and unwavering human determination meant that despite being numerically inferior, the Germans were able to extract a heavy toll on the attacking forces. Every ridge, every forested patch, every village became a battleground in which tactical skill and courage could offset the disparity in numbers. The Hochwald Gap, once a seemingly ordinary stretch of farmland, became transformed into a crucible where the defenders' expertise and resolve were amplified by the advantages of terrain and preparation. The Canadians would come to understand that quantity alone could not ensure success. Each Sherman lost, each soldier wounded, was a testament to the effectiveness of a determined, disciplined, and strategically positioned adversary. Throughout the long days and nights of combat, the defenders demonstrated that warfare was as much about human will as it was about machinery. Even as artillery barrages rained down, as tanks roared across the fields, and as infantry advanced under relentless fire, German soldiers adapted, coordinated, and fought with an intensity born of desperation and familiarity with the land. Their resolve did not make the battle unwinnable for the Allies, but it turned every step forward into a story of struggle and sacrifice, where bravery and loss were inseparably intertwined. In the end, the defense of the Hochwald Gap would be remembered not just for the equipment and tactics employed, but for the extraordinary human determination that allowed a smaller force to challenge a much larger one, leaving a legacy of courage, resilience, and the stark realities of war that would resonate long after the guns fell silent and the battlefield returned to the quietude it had known before conflict had reshaped it entirely. As the Canadian and Allied forces pressed into the Rhineland, the difficulties of the terrain quickly became apparent, adding a layer of complexity and danger that transformed what might have been a straightforward advance into an exhausting test of skill, patience, and endurance. The winter of 1945 had left the region drenched in relentless rains that turned the fertile farmlands into a quagmire, and the thawing ice from the rivers and streams flooded fields and low-lying areas, rendering roads impassable and supply lines precarious. Tanks, heavy with armor and ammunition, struggled through mud that clung to tracks and wheels. Each movement slowed to a crawl as the ground itself seemed to conspire against the advancing troops. Bridges destroyed by retreating German forces compounded the challenge, forcing engineers to improvise crossings under fire while infantry and armored units waited tensely. vulnerable to ambush. Every step forward demanded constant vigilance, as the environment was as much an obstacle as the defenders themselves, shaping the battle in ways that planners could anticipate only partially, and that soldiers experienced fully with every painstaking mile gained. The forests of the Rhineland added another dimension to the Allies' trials, concealing German tanks, anti-tank positions, and infantry ready to strike from hidden vantage points. In these woodlands, visibility was limited, and the dense foliage allowed defenders to execute ambushes with devastating efficiency. Every thicket could conceal a Panther or Tiger tank, poised to take advantage of the restricted mobility of the Allied Shermans, and every clearing could be a trap, pre-registered with artillery or mined to exact maximum casualties. As the Canadian soldiers moved forward, they had to contend not only with the physical impediments of mud, water, and broken terrain, but also with the ever-present threat of sudden, lethal resistance. The combination of natural and man-made obstacles amplified the Germans' ability to resist despite their smaller numbers, turning the advance into a grueling contest of strategy, patience, and nerve. The flooding of rivers and low-lying terrain had a profound impact on logistics, slowing the movement of essential supplies and reinforcements. Fuel, ammunition, and food became precious commodities, and any delay could disrupt the coordination between tanks, infantry, and artillery, exposing units to greater risk. Supply convoys struggled along treacherous roads, often under shellfire or sniper attack, while engineers labored to construct temporary bridges or clear obstacles. The relentless mud turned even routine maneuvers into a battle against the land itself, each tank and vehicle becoming susceptible to getting stuck, immobilized, or stranded, creating vulnerabilities that German forces could exploit with precision. The environmental challenges, while not as dramatic as the roar of guns or the impact of tank shells, were no less lethal, shaping the rhythm of the battle and testing the resilience of every soldier who attempted to navigate them. In the forests and flooded fields, small tactical decisions had outsized consequences. A tank stuck in a ditch, a supply column slowed by deep mud, or an infantry unit forced to detour around a waterlogged area could inadvertently expose themselves to concentrated enemy fire. German defenders, aware of these vulnerabilities, capitalized on the terrain, setting traps and choosing ambush points that allowed them to maximize the effect of their limited forces. Even the strongest tanks could be neutralized if caught in a narrow path or trapped by natural obstacles, and every maneuver required careful planning, rapid adaptation, and a constant awareness of both visible and hidden threats. The combination of environmental hazards and enemy tactics meant that forward momentum was never guaranteed, and success depended as much on patience, reconnaissance, and improvisation as on sheer courage or firepower. The psychological impact of the terrain on the Allied soldiers was profound. The endless mud, the sound of rushing waters, the difficulty of crossing destroyed bridges, and the unpredictability of the forests all contributed to a sense of constant strain and fatigue. Soldiers and tank crews alike faced long hours of exposure to harsh conditions, with little opportunity for rest, often under the threat of enemy fire and the uncertainty of what lay beyond the next rise or thicket. This relentless environment tested morale, discipline, and cohesion, demanding extraordinary focus and perseverance. Leaders had to maintain communication and coordinate movements carefully, ensuring that units remained cohesive despite the natural challenges that threatened to scatter them or slow their advance to a halt. Yet, amidst these trials, the Allies demonstrated remarkable adaptability and resourcefulness. Tank crews learned to navigate through dikes and high ground to avoid the worst of the mud. Engineers devised makeshift crossings, and infantry found ways to scout and clear paths through forests and flooded terrain. Coordination between artillery, armor, and infantry had to be precise, with timing and communication critical to avoid disasters in the treacherous conditions. Every success, no matter how small, was a testament to ingenuity, teamwork, and determination, highlighting that in warfare, the landscape itself could be both enemy and test of skill. The Rhineland's mud, floods, forests, and ruined infrastructure were not just obstacles. They were a stage upon which human endurance, strategic thinking, and resolve were constantly measured. The challenges presented by the difficult terrain ultimately slowed the Allied advance, but also forged a deeper understanding of the interplay between environment and combat. It became clear that victory was not solely a matter of numbers or firepower. It depended on the ability to adapt to changing conditions, anticipate obstacles, and exploit opportunities as they arose. The Rhineland, with its unforgiving mud, treacherous forests, and flooded fields, turned a conventional offensive into a complex and grueling campaign that demanded everything from both commanders and soldiers. The battle through these conditions highlighted not only the ferocity of German resistance, but also the resilience and ingenuity of the Allied forces, revealing that in war, mastery over the land is as critical as mastery over the enemy. As the Canadian forces approached Kolka Ridge, the air grew heavy with anticipation, and the distant rumble of artillery hinted at the trials that lay ahead, a forewarning that the path to victory would be paved with immense danger and sacrifice. The ridge itself was more than just a simple rise in the terrain. It was a carefully fortified position, meticulously prepared by German engineers who understood its strategic significance as the gateway to the Hochwald Gap and the Rhine beyond. Every approach was laden with hidden perils, and the soldiers moving forward knew that the coming assault would test not only their courage, but also their endurance, tactical acumen, and ability to respond in the face of overwhelming resistance. Minefields had been laid with precision, their presence often invisible until the moment a tank or vehicle triggered them, producing violent explosions that could immobilize even the most robust Sherman, leaving its crew vulnerable to follow-up attacks. These explosive traps were not merely mechanical hazards. They were psychological instruments, instilling tension and forcing soldiers to proceed with extreme caution, knowing that a single misstep could be fatal. Beyond the minefields, the ridge bristled with the deadly presence of 88mm German anti-tank guns, formidable weapons that had earned a fearsome reputation throughout the war. These guns, capable of destroying a Sherman at considerable distance, were strategically positioned to dominate the approaches to the ridge, often concealed behind earthworks or within barns, allowing crews to fire and then retreat under cover, only to strike again at advancing forces. The Canadians had learned through bitter experience that the 88s demanded respect, careful planning, and precise coordination between infantry and armor. Every move had to account for the potential trajectories and fields of fire of these guns, and the roar of their shells cutting through the air brought with it the immediate understanding of the mortal risk involved. Tank crews, while trained and skilled, faced the stark reality that their most advanced mechanized equipment could be shredded in seconds if caught in the wrong position, and infantry could be decimated if the 88s found their mark. The combination of minefields and anti-tank positions created a gauntlet that required ingenuity, nerve, and the unshakable commitment to push forward despite the obvious dangers. As the attack commenced, the Canadians experienced firsthand the relentless ferocity of the German defense. Every advance was met with intense resistance, often coordinated to maximize the impact of terrain and firepower. Infantry positions hidden in forests and behind ruined farmhouses unleashed devastating fire, while machine guns and mortars supported the anti-tank weapons in a seamless defensive web. The noise was overwhelming, a cacophony of exploding shells, the thud of tank tracks in mud, and the shouted commands of men under fire, the battlefield became a theater of chaos, where each soldier had to adapt constantly, making split-second decisions to survive while attempting to maintain cohesion and momentum. Tanks were disabled by mines, crews wounded or killed, and every foot gained seemed to cost more than the imagination could readily encompass. In these conditions, courage and determination were as vital as technical skill, as soldiers faced the unnerving combination of visible and unseen threats at every turn. One of the most harrowing aspects of the assault was the coordination required between tanks and infantry, a relationship strained by the density of the minefields and the intensity of enemy fire. Tanks could provide cover and heavy firepower, but their mobility was limited by the terrain and mines, leaving infantry to navigate the deadly spaces between armored support and enemy positions. Conversely, infantry had to clear paths and suppress defenses to allow the tanks to advance, often under a hail of bullets and artillery shells. This intricate dance demanded exceptional trust, communication, and initiative, with every unit relying on the others for survival. Casualties mounted as the German defenders, though outnumbered, exploited every advantage, using the ridge's natural high ground, dense forests, and prepared positions to inflict maximum damage. Each explosion, each vehicle lost, reinforced the harsh reality that the price of progress on Kolkar Ridge would be steep, and the human cost would be indelibly etched into the memories of those who survived. Despite the tremendous obstacles, the Canadians continued to press forward, their resolve tempered by the knowledge that the success of Operation Blockbuster depended on taking and holding the ridge. The terrain, while treacherous, became a proving ground for leadership and ingenuity, as officers and NCOs made rapid decisions to bypass minefields, suppress anti-tank positions, and coordinate reinforcements under conditions of extreme stress and confusion. Artillery barrages had to be carefully timed to avoid friendly casualties while neutralizing as many enemy positions as possible, and tank gunners had to balance aggression with caution, choosing shots that could disable the enemy while preserving their own fragile machines. Every gain was hard-won, every step forward a testament to skill, bravery, and unyielding determination in the face of adversity. The human dimension of the battle was as significant as the mechanical and tactical. Soldiers endured exhaustion, fear, and the constant presence of death, yet they continued to advance because they understood the stakes. Every captured position, every neutralized gun, was a small but crucial victory that contributed to the broader objective of opening the path through the Hochwald Gap and ultimately to the Rhine. Their actions reflected not only military discipline, but also the extraordinary capacity of individuals to rise above fear, sustain effort under unbearable conditions, and fight as part of a collective determined to achieve a goal that seemed almost insurmountable. Kolkar Ridge became emblematic of the larger struggle in the Rhineland, a site where terrain, technology, and human resilience intersected in a crucible of intense combat. By the time the ridge was finally secured, the cost had been immense, with hundreds of casualties and many vehicles destroyed. Yet the capture represented a critical turning point. The fierce resistance of the German defenders had been met with equal determination, and the combination of strategy, courage, and coordinated effort had carried the day for the Canadians. The Battle of Kolkar Ridge stands as a testament to the brutal realities of warfare, where victory is earned through perseverance and sacrifice, and where the complexities of terrain, enemy defenses, and human endurance converge to define the outcome of a campaign that would shape the final months of the Second World War in Europe. Amid the grueling advance through the Rhineland and the fierce combat on Kolkar Ridge, the Canadians and their allied comrades recognized that standard Sherman tanks, though numerous and reliable, were not always sufficient to confront the formidable German Panthers and Tigers that dominated the battlefield with superior armor and firepower. The disparity in tank capabilities necessitated an innovative solution, and it was in this context that the Sherman Firefly emerged as a decisive factor. A weapon that combined the trusted mobility and ruggedness of the Sherman chassis with the penetrating firepower of the 17-pounder gun, transforming the tactical dynamics of armored warfare in the final months of the European conflict. The Firefly was more than just a modification. It represented the Allies' ability to adapt to the evolving challenges of the battlefield, turning what had been a potentially lethal mismatch into a contest where skill, strategy, and ingenuity could bridge the gap between numbers and technology. As the Canadian units maneuvered through the mud-slicked fields and forests, navigating minefields and avoiding deadly 80-atom positions, the Firefly tanks played a crucial role in countering the threat posed by German heavy armor. Unlike the standard Shermans, whose short-barreled 75mm guns struggled to penetrate the sloped frontal armor of Panthers at distance, the Firefly's long 17-pounder gun could pierce the thick steel of these tanks from hundreds of meters away, allowing Canadian crews to engage the enemy on terms that were previously unimaginable. The psychological impact on both sides was significant. German crews, accustomed to outgunning and outmaneuvering Allied armor, now faced a weapon capable of matching their own formidable vehicles, forcing a reconsideration of tactics and lending renewed confidence to crews who had been confronting seemingly insurmountable odds. Every sighting of a Panther or Tiger could now be met with measured aggression rather than cautious evasion, fundamentally altering the calculus of tank engagements on the ridge and across the wider battlefield. The operational use of the Firefly required careful coordination and precise tactics, reflecting the complexity of combined arms warfare. Crews had to work in concert with standard Sherman units, infantry, and artillery, ensuring that the powerful but less numerous Fireflies were positioned where they could make the greatest impact without being overwhelmed. The 17-pounder's remarkable range and penetrating power meant that Fireflies could engage enemy tanks before they closed to ranges that favored the German gunners, allowing Canadian units to establish defensive or offensive positions with increased security. However, this power came with its own challenges. The larger gun required skilled handling and careful maintenance, and Firefly crews had to be acutely aware of terrain, cover, and enemy dispositions to survive against the lethal mix of anti-tank weapons, minefields, and entrenched infantry that characterized the Rhineland battlefield. Success depended on coordination, communication, and the courage to exploit the Firefly's advantages while minimizing exposure to concentrated German fire. Stories from the front illustrate the impact of these tanks in real and vivid terms. On several occasions, Firefly crews were able to destroy Panthers that had threatened to halt the advance of entire squadrons, their long-range shots disabling heavily armored opponents and allowing infantry and standard Sherman units to press forward. The presence of a Firefly in a unit not only provided tactical firepower but also boosted morale, signaling that even the most formidable enemy tanks were not invincible. In one instance, a single Firefly managed to disrupt an ambush set by German armor hidden within the forests flanking the Hochwald Gap, its precise shots forcing the Tigers to retreat and enabling Canadian infantry to secure a crucial segment of the ridge. These engagements highlighted both the deadly efficiency of the 17-pounder and the courage of the crews who operated it under constant threat, often exposed to artillery, small arms, and the unpredictable hazards of the terrain. The integration of Fireflies also transformed the broader operational planning of Operation Blockbuster. Commanders could now allocate units differently, knowing that specific tanks could handle the heaviest German armor, which in turn allowed standard Shermans to perform supporting roles, provide mobility, and concentrate on infantry support and flanking maneuvers. This flexibility was invaluable in a theater where terrain, weather, and enemy resistance created unpredictable conditions and forced constant adaptation. The Firefly's ability to penetrate Tiger and Panther armor reshaped the rhythm of combat, enabling the Canadians to take calculated risks, push through difficult terrain, and engage the enemy in ways that maximized both effectiveness and survivability. It was a clear demonstration that technological adaptation, when combined with tactical ingenuity and human determination, could offset numerical or qualitative disadvantages in critical moments. Beyond their battlefield effectiveness, Fireflies symbolized the innovative spirit that characterized the Allied approach in the closing stages of World War II. They embodied the principle that no matter how formidable an enemy's defenses might appear, careful assessment of strengths and weaknesses, coupled with adaptation and courage, could turn the tide. The tanks were not invincible, and crews often paid a heavy price under the relentless fire of German weapons, but their presence fundamentally altered engagements, creating opportunities where previously there were only perilous obstacles. Each successful engagement with a Panther or Tiger reinforced the notion that technology, strategy, and human resolve were inseparable in achieving objectives, and that even against the most fearsome opponents, resourcefulness and skill could prevail. As the battle for Coker Ridge and the wider Hochwald Gap unfolded, the Firefly tanks contributed directly to the eventual success of Operation Blockbuster, helping to open the path to the Rhine and facilitating the advance into central Germany. Their impact was felt not only in the destruction of enemy armor, but also in the confidence they inspired among the Allied forces, enabling Canadian crews to operate with a combination of aggression, caution, and calculated initiative that proved decisive. The Shermans equipped with the 17-pounder guns stood as a testament to the importance of adaptation and innovation in warfare, a reminder that even in the most desperate circumstances, thoughtful design, tactical acumen, and the courage to act could turn the odds in favor of those willing to seize the initiative and confront the challenges of the battlefield head-on. The struggle for the Hochwald Gap stretched beyond mere tactical maneuvers. It became a relentless test of endurance, strategy, and the human spirit as the battle dragged on for 18 grueling days. A period in which the relentless intensity of combat exacted a staggering toll on the Allied forces and underscored the complexity of warfare in the Rhineland. Every day presented new challenges as Canadian and British troops navigated a landscape transformed into a lethal maze of mud-choked roads, waterlogged fields, and dense forests, where the combination of natural obstacles and German fortifications turned even the simplest advance into an ordeal of patience, coordination, and courage. The Allies confronted minefields, hidden anti-tank positions, and entrenched infantry who, though vastly outnumbered, utilized every advantage of terrain and preparation to inflict maximum damage. The physical and psychological strain on soldiers was immense. They endured the ceaseless noise of artillery barrages, the terrifying unpredictability of enemy fire, and the exhaustion of navigating through terrain that seemed almost designed to thwart their progress at every step. Despite having superior numbers and more equipment, the advance was painstakingly slow, each meter forward paid for with sweat, fear, and the occasional life, as the battlefield became a crucible in which both resilience and ingenuity were tested to their limits. The casualty figures reflected the extreme intensity of the conflict, with over 8,000 Allied men killed, wounded, or missing, and hundreds of tanks disabled, destroyed, or abandoned as the relentless assault pressed forward. Every vehicle lost was not merely a tactical setback. It represented the human cost of warfare, the bravery of men who had to navigate through exploding mines, strafing fire, and artillery shells while attempting to maintain cohesion and momentum in the midst of chaos. The Sherman tanks, including the Fireflies with their formidable 17-pounder guns, faced continual challenges from German Panthers and Tigers, whose superior armor and tactical deployment inflicted disproportionate losses on Allied armored units despite their numerical advantage. Infantry, meanwhile, had to advance under continuous threat from anti-tank guns and panzerfausts, often fighting for every farm, every grove of trees, and every ridge, in an environment where the slightest miscalculation could prove fatal. The protracted nature of the battle emphasized the importance of coordination, strategy, and adaptability, as commanders had to continuously reassess their positions, manage limited resources, and anticipate the Germans' use of terrain and ambush tactics to frustrate the Allied advance. The difficult conditions amplified the human and material cost of progress, with winter rains transforming fields into mud traps, rivers overflowing and cutting off roads, and destroyed bridges complicating the logistics of moving men and machines forward. Tanks and infantry were frequently separated by impassable ditches, forests, or debris, forcing units to improvise and maintain morale under circumstances that might have seemed insurmountable. Communication became a lifeline, yet even with radios and signals, the chaos of battle often disrupted coordination, leaving units exposed to enemy fire or forced to navigate obstacles without support. Leadership at every level became critical. Officers and non-commissioned officers had to make split-second decisions to reroute columns, provide suppressive fire, or pull damaged vehicles to safety while maintaining pressure on the German defenders, who exploited every advantage of terrain, visibility, and prepared positions to slow the Allies. The result was a grinding battle in which momentum was hard-won, and every minor success required extraordinary effort, often at great cost. In the midst of this sustained conflict, acts of bravery and ingenuity emerged that would define the battle and the men who fought it. Tank crews, operating in mud-choked ditches and under constant fire, found ways to navigate minefields and counter ambushes, often relying on intuition and experience to make decisions in the absence of clear orders or visibility. Infantry units, tasked with clearing forests, farms, and small villages, moved in coordination with armor, using covering fire and carefully planned advances to reduce exposure to German fire. Artillery barrages, timed to suppress enemy positions without causing friendly casualties, punctuated the rhythm of the battle, demonstrating the complexity of combined arms operations under extreme stress. Despite the heavy losses, each day of fighting brought incremental gains: a ridge secured, a farm cleared, a path through a forest established. Each small success contributing to the broader objective of breaking through the Hochwald Gap and opening the way toward the Rhine River. The Allies' persistence, resilience, and capacity to adapt in the face of fierce resistance underscored not only their military effectiveness, but also the extraordinary human determination that enabled them to continue advancing despite the costs. The geographical and environmental challenges of the Rhineland magnified the intensity of the battle, transforming the landscape itself into a participant in the conflict. Rivers, swollen by the early spring though, cut across roads and valleys, rendering bridges impassable and forcing units to find alternate routes under enemy observation. Mud slowed tanks and infantry alike, turning maneuverable vehicles into vulnerable targets and exhausting soldiers who slogged through fields and forests, often under direct fire. Forests provided cover for the Germans but complicated the Allies' offensive, as tanks could only advance in constrained formations, exposing themselves to ambushes from hidden anti-tank guns and panzerfaust teams. The Germans, familiar with the terrain and motivated by the defense of their homeland, leveraged these natural obstacles to maximize the impact of their limited forces, slowing the Allied advance while inflicting heavy casualties. In response, Allied commanders devised increasingly sophisticated tactics. Coordinating armor, infantry, and artillery to mitigate the terrain's effects and exploit any opportunity to advance. a delicate balance that demanded both careful planning and bold improvisation. By the 18th day, the toll of sustained combat had transformed both the battlefield and the men fighting upon it. Over 8,000 casualties and hundreds of lost tanks testified to the ferocity of the engagement. Yet the eventual gain of only 25 kilometers highlighted the difficulty of overcoming entrenched, determined defenders under adverse conditions. Each kilometer gained required meticulous planning, relentless effort, and the extraordinary courage of men facing constant threats from land and forest. The incremental progress demonstrated the interplay of human endurance, tactical acumen, and technological adaptation, as well as the sobering reality that even with overwhelming resources, the combination of determined defenders and challenging terrain could slow the advance to a painstaking pace. The prolonged battle of the Hochwald Gap, marked by immense sacrifice and limited territorial gains, exemplifies the brutal arithmetic of war, where courage and strategy are tested against formidable odds, and where every small victory is paid for with extraordinary effort and the unwavering resolve of those who dare to press forward. As the grinding, mud-soaked battle for the Hochwald Gap dragged into its second and third weeks, the Canadian forces found themselves confronting a formidable mix of obstacles. German Panther and Tiger tanks, entrenched infantry, anti-tank emplacements, and an unforgiving terrain that slowed every advance to a crawl, often at the cost of hundreds of lives and vehicles. The early gains, measured in meters rather than miles, reflected both the determination of the Allies and the stubborn resistance of the defenders, who, though outnumbered and outgunned, exploited every advantage the terrain provided. Using forests, farmhouses, and ridges as strongpoints to delay and inflict maximum casualties, Canadian-British commanders, acutely aware of the heavy losses and the slow pace of progress, understood that breaking through the Hochwald Gap would require more than sheer manpower and armored strength. It would demand the precise integration of all available assets, coordination between armor, infantry, artillery, and, crucially, air support to tip the balance in their favor. The intervention of the Royal Air Force's Typhoon fighter bombers marked a turning point in this grueling engagement, introducing a new dimension to the battle and allowing the Canadians to exploit the full potential of combined arms warfare. The Typhoons, fast, agile, and armed with rockets capable of devastating German tanks and fortifications, struck with precision against carefully selected targets, clearing paths through minefields, disrupting enemy formations, and neutralizing anti-tank guns that had pinned down the advancing infantry. The roar of the engines and the thunder of rocket strikes became both a psychological and tactical advantage, demoralizing German defenders who had so far relied on the natural cover of the Rhineland forests and ridges, and giving Canadian troops renewed confidence as they pressed forward. Soldiers who had endured days of relentless mud, shellfire, and close-quarter combat could now advance with the knowledge that the skies above were actively engaged in their struggle, suppressing enemy fire and creating opportunities for maneuvers that had previously seemed impossible under the constant threat of Panther and Tiger fire. The coordination between ground forces and the Typhoons was a delicate and intricate process, requiring precise communication to ensure that strikes hit their intended targets without endangering friendly troops. Forward observers relayed enemy positions, while tank crews and infantry marked objectives, allowing the fighter bombers to concentrate their fire on the most threatening German positions. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Previously entrenched Panthers were destroyed or forced to retreat. Tiger tanks found themselves vulnerable to aerial assault, and the anti-tank defenses that had slowed the advance for days were neutralized, opening gaps in the German lines that could finally be exploited. This integration of air power did not merely add firepower. It reshaped the tactical landscape, allowing Canadian units to regain the momentum that had been stalled for weeks and to maneuver in ways that had been impossible under constant artillery and tank fire. Each successful strike by the Typhoons created a ripple effect, enabling infantry and armor to advance with less resistance, gradually eroding the German position in a way that combined patience, precision, and relentless pressure. The human element remained central to these developments, as soldiers on the ground bore witness to the transformative power of combined arms in real time. Accounts from tank crews and infantry highlight the sense of relief and renewed determination when the distinctive roar of Typhoon engines signaled support overhead, often allowing men to advance across open terrain that had previously been lethal. At the same time, the Germans demonstrated a remarkable resilience, attempting counterattacks and using every tactical ruse to slow the Allied advance, including leaving small groups of defenders to harass forward units even as the main line withdrew. The battle thus became a series of calculated engagements, where each meter gained was the result of careful coordination, the courage of individual soldiers and tank crews, and the precise application of air power to maximize effect and minimize unnecessary losses. The Typhoons, while machines of war, were instruments that amplified human determination, enabling the Canadians to impose their will on the battlefield and tip the scales toward eventual success. Over several days, the relentless combination of artillery, armor, infantry, and air support gradually eroded German resistance, and the accumulated pressure forced the defenders to make the difficult decision to withdraw from the Hochwald Gap. The retreat was conducted under fire, with German units attempting to delay the Allies as much as possible while minimizing their own losses. But the integrated strategy of the Canadians, supported by the RAF, ensured that the withdrawal was carefully managed and ultimately incomplete, leaving behind positions, equipment, and fortifications that could be secured by the advancing forces. By the time the smoke cleared, the Canadian troops had achieved what had seemed impossible just days before: the capture of the Hochwald Gap, a critical passage that opened the way to the Rhine River and provided the Allies with a strategic corridor into the heart of Germany. The success was measured not only in the territory gained but in the operational lessons learned, the importance of adaptability, the power of combined arms, and the necessity of coordinating every available asset to overcome even the most tenacious defense. The final moments of the engagement, marked by the systematic clearing of remaining resistance, the advance of tanks and infantry through forests and fields, and the support of Typhoon strikes against lingering German positions, epitomized the culmination of strategy, courage, and technology working in unison. Soldiers, exhausted from days of mud-soaked marches, artillery fire, and close-quarter combat, witnessed the withdrawal of their adversaries and the gradual opening of a path that would accelerate the Allied advance into central Germany. The capture of the Hochwald Gap was a testament to the persistence and ingenuity of the Canadian forces and their British allies, highlighting that even in the face of formidable resistance, innovation, coordinated effort, and the judicious use of every available resource could achieve decisive outcomes. The victory not only provided a strategic advantage, but also demonstrated the effectiveness of combined arms operations under extreme conditions, serving as a powerful example of how determination, coordination, and the integration of air and ground forces can overcome the most daunting obstacles, paving the way for the final advances that would ultimately bring the European theater of the Second World War to a close. The victory at Hochwald Gap stands as a remarkable testament to the courage, determination, and resilience of the Canadian and British forces who fought in the closing months of the Second World War, a battle that, though often overshadowed by larger engagements, played a critical role in shaping the final chapter of the conflict in Europe. As the guns fell silent and the smoke of artillery barrages dissipated, The strategic significance of this hard-won success became immediately clear. By securing the Hochwald Gap, the Allies had carved open a vital corridor to the Rhine River, a natural defensive barrier that had long protected the heart of Germany. The Rhine represented not just a physical obstacle but a symbolic threshold into the German homeland, and the capture of this passage allowed the Allied forces to press forward into central Germany with greater speed, coordination, and confidence, accelerating the advance that would ultimately culminate in the fall of Berlin just weeks later. Reflecting on the battle, it is striking how the interplay of human ingenuity, perseverance, and technology determined the outcome. Soldiers who had endured 18 days of near-constant combat, negotiating minefields, mud-choked roads, and well-prepared German defenses, demonstrated extraordinary tenacity, often facing life-threatening situations without hesitation. Tank crews, advancing through forests and across open fields under the looming threat of Panther and Tiger tanks, relied not only on their mechanical skill but on the trust and coordination between their units, knowing that each maneuver, each calculated risk, could mean the difference between survival and destruction. Infantry units, clearing farms, villages, and forested ridges, worked in synchrony with armor and artillery, often improvising under fire to maintain momentum despite the exhaustion, fear, and chaos that enveloped the battlefield. Each individual contribution, no matter how small it may have seemed at the time, accumulated into a collective effort that ultimately overwhelmed the defenders, demonstrating that success in war often depends on the sum of countless acts of courage, discipline, and resilience. The integration of air power, particularly the support provided by RAF Typhoon fighter bombers, further underscored the evolution of modern warfare and the importance of combined arms operations. The precision strikes of the Typhoons disrupted German formations, neutralized anti-tank position, and provided the Allied forces with crucial breathing space to maneuver and exploit weaknesses in the defensive lines. The psychological impact of air support cannot be overstated, as soldiers on the ground, exhausted and under constant threat, gained renewed confidence and momentum knowing that the skies above were actively engaged in their struggle. This combination of infantry, armor, artillery, and air power created a synergy that gradually eroded the German defensive positions, forcing them to withdraw and leaving the Allies with a clear path forward. It was a vivid illustration of how adaptability, coordination, and innovative application of available resources could overcome even the most determined and strategically positioned enemy. Yet, beyond the tactical and operational achievements, the Battle of Hochwald Gap reminds us of the human cost of war and the sacrifices that underpin every advance and victory. Over 8,000 Allied men were killed, wounded, or went missing during the 18 days of combat, and hundreds of tanks and other vehicles were lost in a grueling campaign of attrition. These numbers, while staggering, only partially capture the physical, emotional, and psychological toll endured by the soldiers who faced relentless fire, freezing conditions, and the constant uncertainty of life and death. Their resilience and courage transformed the battlefield from a scene of near-impossible odds into a hard-won success, a testament to the indomitable human spirit in the face of adversity. The Germans, equally determined in their defense, fought with fierce commitment to protect their homeland, underscoring the tragic reality that war, even when fought for strategic objectives, exacts a profound cost on all who are involved. The capture of Hochwald Gap, often overshadowed in the grand narratives of the Second World War, should be remembered not only for its strategic importance but also for the lessons it imparts about leadership, coordination, and the human capacity to endure and innovate under extreme conditions. It exemplifies how even the most challenging objectives can be achieved through careful planning, adaptability, and the courage to confront seemingly insurmountable obstacles, providing enduring lessons for both military professionals and civilians alike. By opening the way to the Rhine, the Allies not only secured a critical military advantage, but also set in motion the final sequence of operations that would lead to the collapse of Nazi Germany and the liberation of Europe, marking Hochwald Gap as a decisive, though often forgotten, turning point in the conflict. As we reflect on the events of February and March 1945, it is important to honor the men who fought, the decisions that shaped the outcome, and the extraordinary coordination that made success possible. Their bravery and determination continue to resonate, reminding us that history is forged not only in grand victories but in the persistent, courageous efforts of those who face danger with unwavering resolve. Thank you for taking the time to explore this often overlooked chapter of history with me. And if you found this story engaging and insightful, please like, subscribe, and share to help bring more of these remarkable moments from the past to light. Every view helps keep these stories alive and honors the sacrifices of those who came before us. Wishing you all a peaceful and restful night. Good night, and may your dreams be inspired by the courage and determination of those who shaped history.